Chapter 51, Attracted to Success. The human propensity to be attracted to success is well known, well documented, and generally regarded as something no one can do anything about. Are you annoyed that people are approaching you because you're richer, prettier, better off, or more powerful than them? Suck it up. Ivil dealt with that kind of negative attention by punishing it in as public a way as possible. This earned her a reputation that some thought was awful, but it also kept gold diggers and lesser trouble seekers at bay. With a sufficient application of vengeful violence, the same technique could be applied to politicians and bureaucrats as well. Ivil wondered if, perhaps, she ought to teach this trick to Aurora. The Phobosian noblewoman was in her room on board the Sapho, a room which she had transformed into a small office space. A few boxes were left just outside of the door, ripped open and abandoned as trash. She knocked on the door frame while eyeing the boxes. "Aurora?" "Oh, Evelyn," Aurora said as she stood from a small seat. It still had plastic wrapped around its cushions, and a few packing peanuts stuck to the legs. "I'm glad to see you. What do you think of my, let's call them renovations?" Aurora spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire room. Unlike the captain's cabin, this space was small, tight. Still, it was much larger than the two brooms one might expect on board a warship. The pirates that designed the Sapho built the ship for a small crew, and then filled it with unnecessary luxuries, such as elbow room. "It's nice," Ivil said. Aurora had fitted a small unfolding desk on one side of the room, with a light bar fixed to the wall above it for additional clarity. There was a new computer sitting on the desk, an unfolding laptop with a brick of a base to it, and of course, the chair, which seemed to have magnetic feet. A small shelf was fixed to the wall, with an elastic holding bar to keep the two books on it in place. Actual paper books. Something of a strange luxury. "Why the office setup?" Ivil asked. Aurora frowned. "I would have thought that obvious. If I'm going to have to sift through paperwork, then I want to do it with some level of comfort. It's enough of a pain to do already. Having good tools can only help." "I suppose," Ivil said. She didn't do paperwork. The last time the missus had demanded that she file her taxes, she had found the director in charge of the organization and teleported him into their complaints department. Piece by piece. "Did you need help?" "Not really. Though, I'd appreciate it if you brought the boxes out. I can't fit them in our trash receptacles and I honestly don't know what to do with them." "Sure," Ivil said. She'd disintegrate it later. "Where did you buy all of this?" "Online," Aurora said simply. "Driftwood has its own local net. It's fairly reliable. I wouldn't consider it safe by any means, but I have a decently secure device to connect with, and a false identification to make purchases through." Ivil raised an eyebrow, then glanced at the boxes. They were addressed to a Miss Aurora. "Aurora?" Ivil read. Aurora blushed prettily. "It's easy to remember." "Fair enough," Ivil said. Her glass house might have been impervious to stones, but there was no reason to test it today. "I'm happy to see you settling in. Looks like you're making the Sapho your home." "I suppose so," Aurora said delicately. "It's a nice ship, all told. I think it's nicer than most of what we have available around Phobos." "Phobos is a navy, doesn't it?" Aurora snorted indelicately. "Yes, a navy. Some 30-odd ships, each one 3 decades old at the youngest. They are old Martian surplus that Mars deemed unfit for their mothball fleet. Our personnel is decent, however. Lots of former Martian citizens who purchased citizenship on Phobos for one reason or another and who wanted a continued job in a naval force." "Ah, so Mars builds your ships and trains your crews," Ivil said. "Essentially. There has been a push to change that, but it has run into budgetary issues." "How so?" Ivil asked. "Well, the current way of doing things is exceptionally inexpensive. We're buying old ships and getting decent personnel with training better than we could ever afford to give. New recruits are usually tied to a more experienced sailor and they just pick things up as they go. It's cheap. Building our own flotilla, never mind a full armada, would be expensive. We have shipyards, but they build luxury yachts, not warships." Ivil nodded. There was a pretty severe difference between the two in terms of build quality and such. Mostly owing to their purpose. She'd been on board some older Martian warships whose interiors made 19th century submarines look like palaces. I'd be curious to see the design philosophy that Phobos would bring to the table, Ivil said. Aurora hummed. It wouldn't be pretty. Don't get me wrong, I love my home-moon, and I wish to see it prosper in the future, but Phobos has too much money and not enough tradition. Corruption is a way of life there. We're used to it now, but it's still harmful. If we did make our own warships, they'd either come with casinos and gambling dens built in, or the graft and theft before production would mean a ship made of cardboard and propaganda. Ivil leaned against the door frame, crossing her arms casually. You know, that was a thing. Ships made of propaganda? Aurora asked. Cardboard, Ivil said. Aurora blinked. No, she said. That's not possible. Oh, it is. Cardboard is probably too simple a term for what was actually used. But it was definitely some sort of press material. It's very lightweight, after all, and can be shaped and cut and glued with ease. With the right treatment it can be airtight. But radiation would cut right through, Aurora said. Ivil agreed. It was an Earth fleet, from the tail end of the Third Intrasystem War. It was actually more clever than you'd think. They had a surplus of cardboard and such, and they needed their ships armored and covered. So they used what they had. They specifically left the sections that are critical armored properly, but something like a third of the hull was cardboard. The ship's frame was untouched, of course. That must not have inspired much confidence with the crews. They were unpopular choices, Ivil agreed. But it was the end of the war, and Earth needed ships fast. Shaping cardboard is faster than processing steel, cheaper, lighter. It made for surprisingly mobile craft, I think. Not that it mattered. Aurora hummed. Mars must have loved it. Oh yes, simple point defense would scythe right through, and as you can imagine, if they're cutting back on hull plating, they were doing the same with shielding and the like. She'd enjoyed them, in any case. The ships used to crumple in interesting ways. It was like high-velocity origami. Ah, did you come here to talk about cardboard ships? Aurora asked. Not that it isn't an interesting historical tidbit. I imagine you're full of those? Ivil smiled. She was thankful for her cover as an astroarchaeologist. It meant that any moment where she fell into reminiscence could just be played off as her thinking of her job. I wanted to see how you were doing. We're at your destination, after all. And yet you seem to be settling in. I was worried that I'd find you packing up and ready to run. Aurora pursed her lips. Afraid that I'd run off? A little. She sniffed. No, you don't have to worry about that. Though if I did want to leave, I'd leave. I considered it, even, but the situation around Jupiter will be very complex soon. So many fresh cores, so many competing interests. Already, just looking over the Jovian internet, I can see rumors slipping around. This ship might be one of the safest places I can be. I'm glad you think so, Ivil said. And I agree. You have both a degree of anonymity to protect you, and of course myself. Aurora rolled her eyes, but she smiled nonetheless. I have been thinking about that date as well. It would be hard to fulfill my end of that agreement if I gallivanted off, wouldn't it? Oh, I suppose it would, Ivil said. Have you thought about it more than that? I don't yet have a plan, she admitted. But give me a few days. And maybe access to somewhere that isn't as skeevy as this station. I don't have great confidence in the safety that can be found on Driftwood. Ivil nodded. That was understandable enough. She'd make sure that Aurora felt safe, then. Which might, perhaps, prove a little tricky. Chapter 52, The Mechanic. Oft underappreciated, always underpaid. Ship mechanics are the backbone of human civilization, and according to themselves, if it wasn't for their tireless work, all of humanity would find itself sucking vacuum. A few rare mechanics had a more humble approach to the craft, treating it as art rather than glorified maintenance work. A more common bunch knew that they had the power to turn off the scrubbers, redirect the air, and turn a ship into a mobile sarcophagus. These mechanics were unappreciated by their corporate owners, but they earned a solid pay before being replaced. Ivil knew that the options for that kind of work ranged from awful to only barely tolerable, with a few sparkling exceptions. Today, she was going to question one of those exceptions. Not for herself, of course. She did not care for such things. Rather, she was questioning things on 26's behalf. The truth was that Ivil was concerned that the young woman wasn't reaching her full potential. 26 had a brilliant mind and an incredible amount of talent. She was passionate about ships and genuinely seemed to love what she did. Ivil had listened to her rant about the Sopho's air filtration system for an hour the previous night and had been amused the entire time. The only sour note was the knowledge that 26 might very well never amount to anything but a simple ship's mechanic on some old rust bucket. That was, in Ivil's opinion, unforgivable. If she and 26 ended up together, well, then that would be one thing. 26 could pursue her passion with the entire Martian fleet if she so chose. But if that didn't work out, then Ivil still wanted 26 to come out on top. She had stumbled across Ivil's attention, and now she'd reap the rewards. Ivil had pondered what to do for 26 overnight and decided that the best course of action would be to seek advice, and that meant questioning the only person nearby whom she would trust with such matters. Leaving the Sopho, Ivil made her way over to the next berth over where the Held Together was moored. A few automated repair drones were very slowly fitting some new plating in place over some of the scars left on the ship's hull. That level of repair work could easily be automated, though the cost was likely not so easy to swallow for the captain. On entering the ship, she found herself assaulted by the Held Together's familiar odor. It wasn't exactly pleasant. Stale oil and sweat. The smell of a space that had held a number of people for too long without proper ventilation. Maybe 26 was onto something when she exposed the glories of an above-par filtration system. It would certainly work to keep the stink at a lower level. Evelyn? Ivil turned to find Sonic Spectra standing in the ship's hold. The tech maid straightened her back, hands clasping together over her stomach in a dignified, submissive pose. I was not expecting you here. Forgive me, I didn't prepare any hospitalities. Ivil waved it off. It's fine, she said dismissively. I was actually here looking for you. Oh? Sonic asked. How may I be of assistance? Ivil glanced around, even though she was well aware that they were alone. Are we private? She asked anyway out of courtesy. We are, Sonic replied easily. Is something the matter? Is it urgent? No, it's nothing urgent, I merely don't feel like playing to any charades at the moment, Ivil said. It's about 26? Oh. Have you decided that she's the one? I'm surprised but not disappointed. She's a kind young woman and I think her unique perspective on life could improve your own point of view. It may even have a positive impact on the greater Martian society. Ivil wasn't here for this, but she gestured for the tech mate to go on. Continue. Sonic blinked behind her one-expression mask. I feel like I may have miscomprehended something. Go on anyway, Ivil said. You have my permission to be honest. She paused for a long moment before she nodded. Very well. 26 is young, attractive enough, if in an unconventional way, and kind-hearted. I suspect that her mechanical inclinations would make her a favorite amongst the tech maids of Mars, and while her origins as a Saturnian might frustrate some of the more pure-minded Martians, that same origin might also draw in others who view diversity in immigration favorably. She has no family to speak of, no close political or corporate ties. She'd make for a very neutral spouse in the eyes of the politically inclined, in short. Ivil hummed. I think she's cute and greatly desire to pinch her freckled cheeks. They do seem very pinchable, ma'am. In any case, I'm not certain that she is the one. In fact, I'm having some difficulty deciding how to approach her. Nonetheless, I suspect that you're correct about her demeanor. She's kind and positive. I want her to come out of the situation ahead of where we found her, regardless of the outcome. I see. And what would that entail? Sonic asked with a slight tilt of her head. I was thinking that we could either find work for her in a more prestigious position, or perhaps fund her further education? Sonic nodded. That would be acceptable. Have you considered giving her a scholarship to one of the primary Martian universities? Some of them have links with the tech maids, as technical professionals and peers. They would accept her with open arms, especially with her new core giving her a slight edge, and your endorsement giving her an incomparably valuable edge. Do you think she'd like that? Ivil asked. The tech maid considered it. I think she'd like the results of the education. I don't know if the school environment is one she'd necessarily enjoy, but the subject matter itself is one we know she likes. Ivil was about to acquiesce when she noticed that someone was approaching. The very same someone they were talking about. 26 was now in the ship's airlock, waiting as the held-together's ancient pressurization system did its work. She's coming, Ivil said. Do you have any idea what she had been doing over here? 26 has been coming and going for the last day or so. She's been completing minor repairs. I believe she's making full use of the part assembler and printer on the SFO, Sonic said. Ah, that makes sense, Ivil replied as the interior airlock opened and 26 slipped into the room. The young woman walked right past Ivil and Sonic, humming a happy little tune as she went. She froze by the door, her humming stopping mid-note. Then she turned and blinked at the two. Oh, hi. Hello, Ivil said. Greetings, Sonic replied. Oh, shoot, what are you two doing here? I mean, no, you're allowed, so. Anyway. Hi. 26's face turned as red as her hair and her eyes flicked to everywhere but the two across from her. Ivil resisted the urge to squeeze 26. It was becoming increasingly difficult to do so. Are you here to fix the ship up? Ivil asked. As well as I can, 26 replied. I've been printing things non-stop over on the SFO. Wait, that's okay, right? Using the SFO's printer like that? It's perfectly alright, Ivil replied. Cool. So I've been making replacements for, well, nearly everything. There's a lot of stuff you just can't print, but there are so many parts that you can remake whole and then it's just plug and go. So much easier than patching things with foam and duct tape and chewing gum. Are you here looking for more things to repair, then? Ivil asked. 26 snorted an indelicate laugh. I could spin around and point to something random and it would need some fixing in here. Nah, I'm getting my dolly. Pardon? Ivil asked. In lieu of explaining, 26 went to the far end of the hold and undid a pair of latches holding a small wheeled platform against the wall. She bent down and unfolded a handle on it and tugged the platform after her. This is my dolly, she said. It's for carrying parts around in low G. I was gonna go to a local scrapper and pick up a few things. They have a catalog of parts on the station net, and half of them are mislabeled. They don't know what they have. There was a gleam in her eyes. And that's a mistake I'm going to capitalize on. I want, like, a million different replacement parts that we can get for cheap. Things you cannot print, I imagine. Sonic asked. Exactly. Well, some you can, but you need the files for them, and I can't find some. The Held Together has some parts that predate shipboard printers. No one's made the parts in any sort of CAD, or if they did, I can't find or afford them. So I'll have to fix things the old-fashioned way. Some bits are just not printable. Filters and some electronics. Well, I can hardly let you go on your own, Ivil replied. It would be unbecoming of me to let you get hurt out there. Did you want to come as well, Pendergast? Ivil asked while projecting that the answer would be no. I'll leave you two to it, Sonic replied sagely. Enjoy yourselves. Chapter 53, Ship Scraper. Ship scrapping was a multi-billion-dollar industry, one that was still, somehow, mostly run by smaller family-owned businesses in most planetary systems. That did mean that the service one could expect varied wildly between good enough and god-awful. Ivil walked next to 26, the younger woman was humming a little tune to herself while pushing her dolly along. There was a loud squeak every 3/4 rotation of its front wheels that Ivil wanted to do something about. Thanks for coming with me, 26 said. It's nothing, Ivil said. I had an empty afternoon, and I'd much rather spend it helping you rather than loitering around the ship doing nothing. 26 grinned up at Ivil. Well, thanks anyway. I usually do this kind of thing all on my own. It's nice to have company. Do you not usually have anyone with you? Ivil asked. 26 shook her head. Sometimes Hawk comes with me if I need something heavy picked up, and sometimes Missy will leave the ship with me, but most of the time it's just me on my own. That's quite unfortunate, Ivil said. And dangerous, no? Leaving the ship without anyone to watch your back feels like a recipe for sorrow. It's not so bad, 26 said. The trick is to look so poor that it's just not worth trying anything. She gestured down at herself. She was currently dressed in very Missy-like fashion. Overalls over a loose t-shirt with a few old oil stains on it. I suppose. Though aren't you bothered by that? Passing yourself off as weak? 26 shook her head, then laughed. Evelyn, I am weak. Ah, Ivil said. She glanced at 26 again. The younger woman seemed happy to put her weight into pushing her dolly along and humming her little song. 26 was. Well, Ivil supposed that she was many things. Cute as a button, smart and exceptionally talented when it came to her field of interest. She was lively and upbeat as well. Ivil liked her. But it was also true that in other circumstances, had Ivil just run into 26 out of the blue, she would have dismissed her without a second glance. Yes, she was cute, but she wasn't the sort of attractive that caught Ivil's attention. Even with a little grease smudge on the end of her little nose. Sure, she was smart and talented, but Ivil spent her days on warships crewed by the best of the best. She was surrounded by the smart and the talented throughout the day. That didn't make someone stand out. And 26 was weak. Her single core might help her a little now, but weak pyrokinesis wouldn't a warlord make. It was sad, in a way, but 26 wasn't wrong about herself. She was, undeniably, weak. But she'd only remain that way if she wanted to. You know, you don't have to stay weak, Ivil said. 26 asked as she cut off her humming. What do you mean? I mean that you have one core already. It's possible to leverage that into more. Even assuming you weren't surrounded by friends who want the best for you, all on your own, you could leverage your skills and core and capabilities into more power. How would I do that? 26 asked. Ivil tapped her chin. You'd need solid work, which I'm certain you could find. Split your core and set the earnings aside for some time. Work to grow a nest egg until you can afford a second, compatible core. Once you have two, you can constantly split one to earn enough to help yourself grow. Eventually earning more. It wouldn't be exponential, of course. The more you grow, the more paranoid and careful you'll have to be, but by then if you have a handful of cores, your skills will be in much higher demand. 26 stared for a moment. That would take years, no? It would. Or you could pass those years without making any real progress. One way or another, time will get a march on you. Oh, 26 said. She frowned a little. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do all of that on my own. Well, in that case you're quite fortunate, Ivil said. I am? Ivil nodded. Of course, because you're not on your own. I happen to think that Missy cares enough about you that she'd help you find work. Aurora might likewise assist you, and I'm not without my own resources. Even Pendergast seems to think highly of you, and she is a well-placed member of the Tech Maids. 26 blushed a little, then shook her head. I don't think anyone thinks that much about me, she said. Ivil sniffed and shook her head. If only she knew. Don't sell yourself short. You're a talented young woman, and I'm certain you'll go far if that's what you want. 26 was saved from further embarrassment as they made it into another station attached to Driftwood. This one, from what Ivil could tell, was only a temporary attachment to the station. It was called the Callisto Junker, and it was a station that was mostly composed of large warehousing units and the hulks of some 24 semi-disassembled ships in various states of disrepair. The Callisto Junker was linked to the rest of Driftwood via a single long-stationed arm with a few remote-operated tugs tied up alongside it. They paused at the entrance to that arm, where a man in dirty clothes and whose odor was an affront to all that was good greeted them. "Here for something?" he asked. "Parts," 26 said. "I've got a list." "HMPH," the man said. He rubbed at his nose with the back of a hand, then nodded them in. "Go on. Don't bump the walls too hard, and watch for the gravity." Ivil wondered what he meant for a moment before she cast her senses forwards. The long passageway to the junker had gravity until somewhere along its middle, where the station's artificial gravity gave out suddenly. "That might make it easier to carry things," 26 said as they started along. "I was a little worried about grabbing some things because they were too heavy." "You don't have to worry about that," Ivil said. "I can lift heavy things for you." She wouldn't admit it aloud, but Ivil secretly wanted to be seen lifting heavy things by 26. They made it to the end of the tunnel where Ivil carefully took over pushing the dolly for a 26. The moment they were out of the main station's artificial gravity, the lift became something of a danger. It was better if Ivil took care of it, since she could easily insist that gravity do as she wanted. 26 floated along happily next to her, at least until they slipped into the main lobby of the Callisto Junker. There she schooled her features and tried to look serious as she walked up to the counter. "Hi, I have a list of things I'm looking for. Do you think you can help me?" The next few minutes were a test of Ivil's patience as 26 had to deal with something that was somehow worse than the usual obstructive bureaucracy. Willful incompetence. The people who ran the Callisto Junker were, in a word, idiotic. Their record-keeping left much to be desired. Their pricing scheme was based entirely on how much they thought they could rip someone off, and they didn't seem willing or capable of lifting a single finger to help anyone with anything. She was tempted to rip the side of the station open to vent the lot of them, but 26 had the patience of a saint and managed to smile her way through all of the obstinacy before her. It wasn't long before she had a man behind the counter wrapped around her pinky with a long-winded discussion about some particular kind of engine and its frequent need for repairs. Soon enough, they'd gone over the list of parts that they were looking for, and 26 was bargaining over their price. A worker brought them all over to a space to the side where 26 checked over the parts one by one. "This is no good," she said, placing a small device to the side. "The contacts are dirty." "Dirt can be cleaned off," the worker said. "That looks like verdigris," 26 said. "And that'll only happen if the plating over the copper's worn out. I won't get more than a day or two out of that. But this filter's all right. It's been used, but not worn out. That's from a little freighter that we picked up a month back. It was in an accident." "What sort?" 26 asked, immediately suspicious. "Crashed into a gantry crane," the dealer said with a grin. "Ah, okay. Does the kind of accident matter?" Ivil asked. Both 26 and the dealer snorted, as if that was the most self-evident thing in the world. Once the dolly was loaded up to capacity and the dealer was paid, they started to head out. "So, straight back to the ships, or can I tempt you into lunch first?" Ivil asked. "My treat." 26 looked reluctant, but the gurgle of her stomach was anything but. Chapter 54, Fancy Foods. "I never asked, but what sort of food do you like?" Ivil asked as she walked next to 26. The younger woman was pushing her dolly along with a look of concentration on her face. It was currently loaded up with her haul of goodies. Or at least, scrap that 26 seemed to think were goodies. "That seems like a pretty broad question," 26 said. I don't really know. I guess I'm a little picky." "Picky?" Ivil asked. 26 nodded. "On Saturn, in the rings, we had 6 flavors of dehydrated food to pick from. My favorite was red. Purple was gross, and I didn't like blue very much." "I see, and what about after you left the rings?" Ivil asked. "Well, then I ate whatever Hawk makes on the hell together. We actually got into an argument once. That was back when I was newer on the ship. Hawk noticed that I wasn't eating enough, and so he sat me down and ran through all of the ingredients I liked and those I didn't, From then on he made sure to include enough stuff that I'd like so I'd always get my fill. That's actually quite kind of him, Ivil replied. So what sorts of foods do you dislike? Well, anything green, spicy, crunchy, or too sweet, 26 said. Ivil ran through a list of every food she could think of that fit those criteria. It was a long list. Wouldn't that account for a great number of meals? Huh? No, there's plenty of ship food that pass. Red, pink, green, ironically, yellow, all three of the metallics. That's if you buy from Shipfarers United Food. If you buy Mars Agri-Crop food packs, they use numbers. I like meals 2, 3, 7 and 9 from them. Can't stand for it. Jupiter has, like, 4 different food brands, and their naming stuff is all over, so it's a bit trickier to tell what's good or not. Ivil blinked a few times, then shook her head. What about real food? How are the things I'm talking about not real food? 26 asked. I sincerely doubt that a human interacted with them in any meaningful way from the growth of whatever plant started it all to the moment they're packaged. That doesn't make them not food, 26 said. They have calories. I don't think having calories is enough, Ivil replied. She wasn't a connoisseur of fine dining and excellent food. Not to say that Mars mistreated her when it came to diets, she always had excellent meals waiting for her on whichever ship or station she occupied. It was just that she didn't require sustenance. In fact, eating was often a chore. Anything she ate needed to be digested, and that led to waste, and she really wasn't fond of that entire process. More often than not she just burned any food she ate within herself until nothing but subatomic particulates remained. It was much cleaner that way. Still, she enjoyed a nice meal for the sake of companionship and for her taste buds. We're going to a nice food place, Ivil replied. There's stands in some of the corridors we passed, 26 said. No, I said nice. And I don't mean some dingy bar, either, Ivil decided. She stopped by a map screen at a nearby intersection and scanned through it until she found an appropriate enough dining establishment. It was 2 stations away, but that wasn't all that far. I can't bring my dolly all the way there, 26 said. That's one of the nicer stations. They won't complain, Ivil said. She'd make sure of it. Trust me? 26 eyed her, then nodded. Okay, she said. Ivil grinned, then walked by 26's side. While she did so, she tugged out her pager and tapped into it with one of her powers. It sent a small encrypted message to one of the first contacts on her list. It wasn't a very complex message. I need a reservation at the Bowman Wire on Driftwood Station. There, nice and simple. It took them 20 minutes to arrive at the restaurant, a trip made somewhat more complicated by having to push the dolly around and stuff it into some elevators meant for pedestrian traffic as opposed to more industrial work. Still, no one complained. Ivil did overhear some muttering about maintenance, which she supposed was a logical conclusion to jump to. Are you sure about this? 26 asked as they came up to the front of the Bowman Wire. The restaurant was designed to fit that particular aesthetic that the rich and somewhat influential enjoyed. Private eating spaces, small rooms with singular tables. A human waiter and staff dressed in formal attire. They even had old earth classical music from before the first Enter-System war playing softly throughout the room. I'm positive, Ivil said. She held the door open for 26 and her dolly, which only barely fit into the small lobby area at the front. A man stepped up to them, looking rather frazzled despite his elegant suit. You cannot bring that in here, he said. We did already, Ivil replied. Reservation for 2, under the name Ivil. The man made a passable impression of a fish while 26 abandoned her dolly and slid in behind Ivil, using the taller woman as a shield. Is this okay? 26 asked. It's fine, Ivil replied. This is merely an application of power. The man stiffened, then bowed. We have the VIP suite ready for you and your companion, ma'am, he replied. Compliments of the owner. You know Jean Paul? Never heard of him, Ivil admitted. Had Mint twisted the poor owner's arm for this? She supposed it was plausible enough. Unfortunately, it was currently evening station time and the restaurant was quite full. As she walked across it with 26 shuffling next to her, she discovered several eyes on her, and when they arrived at the VIP suite it was to find it being emptied of its previous occupants. They were not pleased about this. "Do you have any idea who I am?" a rotund man was saying. His jowls wobbled dangerously in the direction of a young serving woman who was trying her hardest to placate him. "I'm the goddamn mayor of Driftwood. You can't kick me out." 26, go take a seat, I'll just be a moment, Ivil replied. She reached out and grabbed the large man blocking their path by the upper arm and moved him aside. 26 squeaked and slipped by and into the safety of the VIP suite. "Who are you?" the mayor snapped. "Unhand me at once." "You're making a scene," Ivil said calmly. She met his eyes. "The scene will be far worse if you don't settle down. I'm certain the Bowman Wire is being reasonable about all of this. Unfortunately, I have a propensity not to be overly reasonable. So don't ruin my date or I'll ruin this fine establishment by spreading your remains across it. That might upset the serving staff who won't do their job as easily, which would in turn upset me. I might have to reconstitute you, claw your soul out of hell, then show you a world of torment the likes of which your fat adult mind cannot comprehend." The mayor stared slack-jawed for a moment before glaring. "Who in the fuck do you think you are?" he asked. She sighed. Would 26 be upset if she caused a small political disturbance and interrupted their meal? Mint certainly would be, but she didn't make much of a fuss about what they wanted. The mayor started to fuss and whine, so she removed his ability to make noise. He had bodyguards, she noticed. One of them had been trying to reach her from the moment she had approached him, but his attempts were so laughably weak that she didn't really care. He was currently pushing against a constant and unstoppable pressure that was preventing him from reaching her. "Major Domo?" she asked. "Why yes ma'am," the man who'd greeted her at the door asked. "Please relocate the mayor to your second best rooms. His meal and drink can be put on my tab." "Yes ma'am, thank you, ma'am," the major domo said. Ivil let go of the mayor and eyed him. "Do not seek revenge. This wasn't a slight. This was a mercy. Now, I have a young lady to woo, so shoo." Ivil slipped into the VIP suite where 26 was sitting. The young woman was shifting from side to side nervously, and seemed afraid to touch anything. Possibly because any one of the utensils on the table before her were worth more than 26 made in a year. Still, 26 screwed together her courage and met Ivil's eyes. Can we talk?" she asked. "I think that maybe we're, not on the same wavelength about some things." Chapter 55, Endearingly Complex. Ivil pulled out the seat across from 26 and sat herself down. This felt like it was important, at least to the younger woman. "Did you want to order first, or talk first?" Ivil asked. 26 blinked at the question. This isn't a fast food place, so I imagine it'll take a while for things to arrive, right? Like I said, I've never really been to a place like this. It's not too long, but yes, someone has to cook the food, Ivil said. "Okay, in that case, 26 squirmed on the spot. Making choices like this wasn't her forte, Ivil could tell, but Ivil still wanted to see 26 put her foot down. Or tap her foot down gently, as the case may be. "Let's order first, then." "That sounds good," Ivil said. There was a single menu on the table already, as well as a cup of wine and some glasses of water. Fortunately the matron came in and cleaned the space up before she had time to complain. He left a pair of fresh menus out before bowing and leaving the room. Ivil perused the menu for a while, picking something relatively simple to eat. When she was done, she noticed 26 sweating a little as she stared at her own. "Is something the matter?" Ivil asked. I was going to order red," 26 said. "What's an aperitif?" She did not pronounce it correctly. "That's alcohol that you take before you start your meal. Think of it as a liquid entree." "What's an entree?" 26 asked while trying to disguise a cringe. Ivil smiled, then stood up, carried her chair around, and sat on the other end of the table, right next to 26. "Here, let's go over the menu together," she said as she leaned to the side. She was aware of her chest pressing into 26's shoulder and of 26 stiffening right up at the contact. I can figure it out, I'm sure," 26 said. "It's just a menu, it can't be more complicated than a tech manual." "Oh, it's not, but a lot of old traditions were kept alive through culinary practices," Ivil explained. "You're not unintelligent for not being aware of some cultural cues, you're just uninformed. Here, these are the starters. They are small, easy to eat. Snacks of a sort." "Okay," 26 said with a nod. "These are the mains, and these are the desserts for after. 3 courses should be plenty, I think. Is there anything that jumps out to you? We could ask for something else. Something not on the menu?" 26 asked. "Like a secret menu item?" "I don't know what that is," Ivil said as she leaned a little away from 26 to better see her eyes. "Oh. My favorite fast food place has a secret item that's not on the menu. It's called Red 3. It's just 3 red meals together, but the dessert portion's taken from cyan. It's better?" "I see," Ivil said. "Well, in a place like this, we can bully the chef into doing whatever we want, and seeing as how they're likely professionals, they'll jump to it. But for now, how about you pick what sounds good?" 26 nodded. "Titan Wagyu over Saturn rings." "What's a Wagyu?" "It's a kind of beef. Wagyu is just the term for the quality. Considering the price, it might come from a real cow as well. But there are no prices written on here," 26 said. Ivil smiled. "Don't worry about that," she said. 26 had a few more questions, but she settled on Venusian mushroom tartare, then the Titanian Wagyu, and they both decided to see if they'd have room for dessert before ordering any. Ivil reluctantly stood back up and returned to her side of the table. 26 seemed serious about what she had to say, and that meant giving it some level of decorum. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Ivil asked as soon as the waiter was gone with their orders. 26 said. She shifted in her seat, then visibly stopped herself from fidgeting. "Evelyn. Do you love me?" Ivil blinked. "That's a hard question. I don't think I love you, not that way." "Oh, okay," 26 said as she exhaled hard. "I would like to, however," Ivil continued. That had 26 tensing up a little more. "What do you mean?" What do you think I meant when I said I was searching for love?" Ivil asked. "I don't know," 26 said uncertainly. "I guess you're looking for a, significant other." Ivil smiled a little. "Yes, that's accurate, but I have the feeling you don't know what that means, exactly." 26, I have only known you for a week and a few days. That's enough to know that I like you. I think that love takes a little longer than that to develop, and ideally it requires that both parties want it to happen. One-sided love is not something I will engage in. 26's mouth formed a little O of understanding, then she flushed. So where does that leave us?" "At the dating stage, I think," Ivil replied. "Which mostly involves spending time together, getting to know each other, meeting each other's friends and such. If there's a spark, then there's a spark. And if there was a spark, Ivil would turn it into a blaze that would blind the entire galaxy in its fervor, but 26 was maybe not ready for that." "Okay," 26 said. "I talked to the captain about it. She's, well, old enough to be my mom, you know, and she has been divorced 3 times. I see. Anyway, she said that it's complicated and wasn't very helpful," 26 admitted. "But, I think that you're very pretty." Ivil blinked, then giggled into her hand. That set 26's face aflame. No, I'm not laughing at you," Ivil said to calm the young woman down. Her fidgeting had returned with a vengeance. "I wasn't expecting it, is all. You're very pretty too." "I'm not," 26 said with confidence. "You are," Ivil replied with the certainty of God overlooking all that was made and declaring it good. I like it when you gush about mechanics and the things you're passionate about, even if I know nothing about them, and I like how quick you are to learn. Those aren't physical things, 26 pointed out. Ivil shrugged. You have very cute freckles. I like how tall and sort of awkwardly gangly you are, like a baby horse, and your breasts look very squeezable. 26 choked, and Ivil decided to stop there because she was worried that the younger woman might run out of blood, so much of hers had relocated to her face. I meant that you like non-appearance stuff about me, 26 said. But all I know about you is that you're strong, and nice, and know stuff that I don't. I mean, I know a little about you but it's like. She waved her hands around ineffectually. It's like walking into a ship you've never seen before to service it, but you don't know where anything is. All you've gotten is a look at the outside, and sure you might recognize the make and model, but that doesn't mean you know where to pump the oil and how to check the filters. Ivil had never been compared to a ship before. She had been propositioned before, but the offers had never sounded like an oil change. She wasn't sure what to make of it. I think I see what you mean. You like the look of me, and my power I suppose, but you don't know if you'd like the real me beyond just my appearance and strength. Yeah, 26 agreed with a firm nod. She was still blushing a little, but it was under some amount of control now. You can read the spec sheets all you want, but you don't know until you know. I like that, Ivil said. Would it help if I told you more about myself? 26 eyed her for a good long time. No? No? Ivil asked, surprised by the answer. I mean, yes, I guess, but you can't just trust a ship's diagnostics system. You need to observe the ship, test it, see how it handles stress. You are aware that I'm not a ship. And if I were a ship, I'd be a warship the likes of which no single mechanic could ever hope to understand all on her own. 26 sat up straighter at that, and her eyes narrowed. Was that a challenge, Evelyn? Because it sounded like one. Just you watch, I'll know so much about you that there won't be a rattle or clang that I couldn't identify in my sleep. Ivil stared while working hard not to smile. Was that embarrassing? 26 asked. I'd rather choose to think it was endearing, she replied. Chapter 56, Tease. Humanity has always had dragons. From the most ancient of times, in the most ancient of civilizations, when banging two rocks together to make a spark was humanity's greatest technology, humanity has had its monsters. Great serpents, powerful lizards, fire-breathing creatures of myth and legend. These were spoken of in hushed whispers, painted in glorious details, stories were traded, exaggerated, and expanded upon. These beasts and monsters became the symbols of power and the slur for those too rich and powerful for their own good. Humanity needs its dragons, because we need something in the dark to keep us moving. In the past, the dragons were myths. Now, the dragons are people. In some places the three emperors go by another name. The three great dragons. Ivil considered this as she ate some dragon egg cake. It was a small, oval-shaped macaroon with striations and blotches over its surface. The paste within was a sweet fudge-like confection, warmed a little over room temperature, and the entire egg was nested in a base of vanilla ice cream, with real dairy. She smiled across at 26. Want to crack it? She asked. 26, after having her taste buds forced through an orgy of new and interesting flavors for the past hour, simply nodded. Her own dessert was the simplest thing on the menu. A chocolate brownie with a dab of cream and warm chocolate syrup. She had never had a brownie that didn't come from a vacuum-sealed package with easy tear tabs. How do I do it? 26 asked. Just give the egg a good smack with the back of your spoon, Ivil instructed. 26 leaned forwards and pinched the end of her tongue between her lips. Ivil was unreasonably tempted to reach out and grab the little pink thing, but she restrained herself. Oh. It broke, 26 said. She leaned up and stared into the broken shell, where the warm insides were already melting the eggshell exterior. Ivil helped her cut out a gooey slice to put onto 26's own plate, then she dug into her dessert. This was nice. The food was of acceptably if middling quality for a fine dining establishment, but Ivil couldn't expect too much from someplace around Jupiter. The company made up for any deficiency. "Oh, it's so sweet," 26 said. She had a habit of kicking her feet up and down when excited and when eating sweet things. She even closed her hands into little fists and wiggled them. "It is a little sweet, yes," Ivil replied. "I'm glad you're enjoying it so much." 26 nodded, then she stared across the table at Ivil, blushed some more, then sat up straighter. "Sorry," she said. "Sorry? What are you apologizing for?" Ivil asked. "I mean, that was a little childish of me. You're all mature and adult and, well, I'm obviously an adult too, but I don't always act my age." "I wouldn't want you to act in any other way," Ivil replied. "Please, just be yourself. I like you the way you are, trust me. I just hope that you don't mind if I'm not as obviously emotional as you." "Obviously emotional?" 26 asked. "Does that mean that you're unobviously emotional?" "I suppose that it might mean something like that," Ivil replied. 26 leaned her elbows on the table and squinted as she stared at Ivil. Really stared, with the sort of intensity Ivil imagined was usually reserved for schematics viewed in poor lighting. "Oh, I see it," 26 said with a grin. "And what do you see?" Ivil asked. 26 pointed at her, specifically her brows. "It's all in the eyebrows. Yours go. Wait, how do you only move one? Yours tilt just a little. It's like instead of smiling with your whole mouth, or frowning, your eyebrows give it away." 26 frowned, then glared, then opened her eyes wide, all seemingly in an attempt to gain some control over her own brows. It wasn't very successful, except in making Ivil want to laugh. "You've caught on to my secret, then?" Ivil asked. She purposefully raised one eyebrow with the question, which set 26 to giggling. Soon enough, however, it was approaching time to go. "I think you might have to roll me back," 26 said as she tapped her belly. "I don't think I've ever been so full." "It was my pleasure," Ivil said. "Let me take care of the bill, and I'll be right with you." 26 hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Ivil stepped out of the room, then slowed time down to a crawl. She needed a moment. Both to control herself because resisting the urge to hug and cuddle and pinch 26 for over an hour was taxing and because she needed a moment to think. This had gone about as well as she could expect. She learned a little about 26, and they had a nice time. Did she feel a spark? She was pretty sure she did, but 26 just wasn't great at the more traditional sort of flirting that was charged with tension and sexual energy. This was a lot more friendly and sweet. Ivil took a deep breath, then let time snap back to its normal rhythm. Yes, this had gone about as well as she could expect. She settled the bill with the matron, who had already received payment from an unknown source, tip included, then returned to find 26 waiting for her in their private room. They left for the exit, where 26's dolly was still waiting. "Hop," 26 said as she put her weight into pulling the dolly back. "Back to the ships?" she asked. "I think that would be best," Ivil replied. She held the door open for 26, who quickly started to push her things along. Ivil kept pace next to her. Did you enjoy yourself?" Ivil asked. 26 nodded. "It was nice. You know, that's the first date I've ever been on, and, Evelyn, do we have to end it with a kiss?" Ivil perked her brow, then stilled it when she realized what she was doing. "Do you want it to?" 26's cheeks reddened, but she nodded, then shook her head. Yes? A little. Then maybe we'll just end it with a little kiss, if that's what you want," Ivil replied. 26 swallowed, but nodded all the same. "Okay then. By the way, can you help me with something? It's related. To the dating, I mean. Oh. I need help arranging a date with someone I like. 2 dates, actually." "Go on," Ivil said. 26 stared ahead for a moment, then nodded to herself before looking back up to Ivil. "I need help arranging a date with Aurora." Ivil didn't miss a step, because that would be clumsy, but she might have had she had any less control over herself. You want me to help you arrange a date with Aurora? Yes? 26 squeaked. And maybe one with Missy? Do you think that would work? Between me and Missy, I mean. Have I blown it already? She slumped against the handles of her dolly, which actually pushed it along faster. I'll admit, I'm a little confused, Ivil replied. Well, it's simple, isn't it? Everyone is like a ship, going through the world, doing their jobs, taking care of what they need. We all need maintenance, and love, and a good crew. Wait, I'm losing the analogy. Anyway, we're all like ships. You're a big sexy super dreadnought, Aurora's one of those sleek Martian diplomatic vessels. Missy's more like one of those old Earth Alliance destroyers. And I don't see why you only need to pair two ships up together. Why can't we all be together, like a fleet? And if that happens, then it only makes sense that every ship had good comms with the others, right? What are you in this analogy? Ivil asked while she processed the whole rest of that. Huh? Oh, I dunno, some old tug or something. Ivil was quiet for a while, such a long while that they were almost at the hell together. I think that you might not be entirely wrong, though I do question your analogy a little. Also, I don't think you're just an old tug, you deserve better than that. 26 smiled and shook her head. Maybe, maybe not. But you know what's nice about old tugs? They're reliable, and no one minds them too much, and maybe they're good at pushing ships together. Ivil reached over and patted 26 on the head. Thank you, then. I'd be honored to help you with your ship-pushing plans. 26's grin was spectacular. Then they were at the Hell Together's airlock, and 26's grin changed for an uncertain blush. So, we're here. I have a lot of work to catch up with, inside, in there, alone? I see, I think that means it's time for that kiss? If you still want it? Why yeah. Ivil leaned down, carefully used a hand to touch 26's jaw. The younger woman's breath caught, and her eyes squeezed shut. Then Ivil gave her cheek a peck. Chapter 57, All Which Matters. Things came, things went, and humanity with all of its idiosyncrasies and strangeness kept on. Ivil felt like she was floating that evening. Yes, the little kiss with 26 had been about as chaste as a kiss could be, but it had been a kiss, and that's all that mattered. She felt a comfortable warmth in her stomach, like a million stars going supernova all at once. Enough heat to usher in the death of a world, and bubbling and popping and making her want to skip. Not that she did such a thing, because it would be immature and would ruin her image. She contented herself to keep a small, demure smile on and perhaps the faintest of flushes. That good mood was made all the stronger as she returned to the sofa to find Aurora waiting for her. The noblewoman's hair was wet and her skin was still damp. She'd clearly just exited the shower, and yet she was dressed cleanly and appropriately, as if she was just moments away from stepping into a board meeting of some sort. "Evelyn," she said with a polite smile. "Just the woman I wanted to see." "Oh?" Ivil asked. Ever since 26 had pointed it out, she was acutely aware of her eyebrows doing things of their own volition to communicate how she felt. "Did you need me for something?" They were in that small space just within the sofa ladder away from the bridge and right in front of the corridor leading past the first mate and captain's rooms and to the ladder leading down into the belly of the ship below. The bigger washrooms, with the nicer showers, were technically just below the bridge. Ivil figured that that was where Aurora was coming from. Aurora nodded. "I did need you for something," she said before she adjusted her glasses. "It's not a romantic matter, to make that clear from the start." "That's unfortunate," Ivil replied with an easy smile. Aurora cleared her throat. "Yes, well, as the case may be, it's not. I wanted to talk about our next moves now that we're in the Jovian system." "Ah yes, the meeting of the moons," Ivil replied. "Indeed. I've had a couple of days now to look into things. I don't exactly have a sterling spy network here, but there are enough rumors on the Jovian internet to hint at what's coming up. Before the Conference of Moons, there will be several smaller events." "Oh?" Ivil asked. "One of these is after tomorrow, around Callisto. I was wondering if you'd want to attend with me? Of course, Ivil replied. What sort of event is this, however? It's a meeting between some of the minor moons, Aurora said. Honestly, as things are progressing, I think the League of Free Moons is facing its first schism. Didn't you say that the leader of the organization was a genius? Ivil asked. She could very well recall that conversation. Aurora nodded, then gestured down the corridor. Should we talk over something to drink? I don't mind standing here, but it does become a little awkward. Ivil agreed, so she gestured Aurora forwards and the noblewoman bowed slightly before moving along. The League of Free Moons is, of course, young as far as such things go. Tradition might be a shackle to some, but it's also important to build legitimacy, and the League has no traditions. It was mostly an excuse to build ties between weaker moons, coordinate relief, and to have a third party involved in any conflicts that was more or less neutral. I vaguely recall that not working at all, Ivil replied. Aurora tsked. It really doesn't. There was a short-lived conflict some 3 years ago, I don't know if you recall. I don't, sorry, Ivil replied. It was between Ariel and Umbriel, 2 of Uranus' moons. They both have minor orbital colonies, and honestly they don't matter overly much. I think the conflict was semi-religious in nature. It was a mess that no one wanted to get involved with. But the League of Free Moons stepped into it anyway. And the results? Ivil asked. She waited as Aurora navigated the ladder down to the level below, then followed. She was keenly aware that as she walked down the steps, Aurora's attention was on her rear. It was nice. Oh, yes, well, the League has something like 12 medical ships. We had 15. 3 of them were shot down over the 2 moons. It's actually what ushered in the new director. She took the incident as a stepping stone to take over the League. Since then the League's stance in conflicts is a lot harder. Can the League even sustain such things? Ivil asked. Aurora made a so-so gesture. The League has some amount of discretionary funds. A lot of these are being poured into the League's defense force. It's a small army, very small. I think some of the greater moons have militias with more ships and more men in them, but the League defense force is pulling resources from all over. I think the plan is to build an actual elite fighting force. Interesting. They are taking the Martian approach to warfare? The Mars of 50 years ago, maybe, Aurora said. On seeing Ivil's questioning look, she elaborated. Current Martian doctrine basically hinges entirely on Mars having the biggest stick in the system. Don't get me wrong, a star dreadnought like the Purgatorial Oblivion moving in too close is a nightmare for any naval force in the system except maybe the Earth Alliance, but it's still just one big brick of a ship. I'm no strategic expert, but I've listened to the experts, and Martian force projection has switched from being about them being an elite force and moved towards Mars just having the biggest guns. Ivil nodded along. That actually made some sense. Mars was used to being the strongest military force for some time, and while she didn't doubt that the Martian elite was still the best. Time moved on. Others would eventually catch up. Maybe the Admiralty had figured that out already and were planning for just such an eventuality by pushing the Navy towards a more comprehensive approach to things. Aurora and Ivil sat at the dining table after Aurora fetched a pair of mugs with some steaming hot cocoa in them for them to share. We've gone off topic, she said. The meeting. It's between 8 of the League's moons. Callisto itself, Styx, Galatea, Umbriel, Titania, Hyperion, Tethys, and with us present, Phobos. That's a decent number of moons, isn't it? Ivil asked. Decent in number, small in stature, Aurora said. You'll note that there's no Triton, no Miranda, no Titan or Io or Europa on that list. Ah, Ivil said. It's a group of... Those aren't the smallest moons of any planetary system, with the exception of Phobos. We're one of 2 moons around Mars, so we're the exception, Aurora said. But yes, they are all the third and smaller moons of their respective planetary systems. Not just in size. There's a very real correlation between the size of a moon and its political power, but that's the subject of another dissertation. Ivil smiled faintly. Aurora was usually a very reserved and polite young woman. She sat straight and seemed very composed at almost all times. That was, until she started to talk about something she cared about. In a way, she was similar to 26, but with years and years of taught behavior keeping her from expressing too much when she landed on a topic she cared about. Right now, she was fondling her mug and rocking very faintly from side to side as she talked, as if she was listening to a song that only she could hear. It was very cute, Ivil decided. And the sheer amount of abstract knowledge Aurora had about intersystem politics. Well, that was just hot. So, this meeting, where is it? Ivil asked. And when is it as well? Technically, tomorrow. It's on Oprah Station, one of the newer Callistoian stations. It's actually relatively close at the moment, so transitioning over shouldn't be too complex. Did you intend to take the Sifo over? Ivil asked. Aurora shook her head. Just us. There are transports. To that end, however, I did hire some additional help. A local guide who has some knowledge of Jovian politics. She came well recommended and seemed pretty discreet. I was hoping you'd accompany me? Ivil perked up. Of course. How long will this take, however? A day to travel to the station, then 1 day for the meeting, a day's trip back, Aurora said. It should give us a lot of information about the conference in a relatively discreet way. You mentioned a schism earlier, is this part of it? Somewhat. The League has almost 200 members. 80 full members, then the rest are applicants or minor members. You can't have that many separate groups without coalitions and infighting. Not to mention planetary alliances. It's not conspiracy when interests naturally align, after all. Chapter 58, Confidence. Sometimes one has to respect confidence, even if that confidence is entirely misplaced. I want to come, 26 said with the surety of someone unaware they were jogging through a minefield. She was standing on the end of the dining room table where Ivil and Aurora were preparing themselves for their little side adventure. Mostly it was Aurora who was doing the preparations. She needed clothing to travel, clothing for the presentation, and something nice to wear afterwards. That didn't take into account the various computers, hygiene products, and other miscellany she needed to bring with her. Fortunately, Aurora was a tidy packer. Unfortunately, packing all of her things into a single medium-sized suitcase took time and effort. Ivil was helping, but was also sorely tempted to shove everything in and tell it to stay. Her own things were in a much smaller suitcase. Just to be clear, Ivil said. When you say you want to come, you mean with us, yes? 26's mouth worked, then she stomped a foot down. Yes, of course. Ivil nodded. She knew. She knew because 26 had spent the better part of half an hour pacing back and forth in the engineering base psyching herself up, and Ivil was aware of her the entire time. But she couldn't let such an easy double entendre slip by, not when 26 and Aurora both blushed so prettily. That would actually be up to Aurora, Ivil said. This is her mission. Aurora looked up, inspecting 26 for a minute. I suppose having a talented mechanic along with us couldn't hurt, she began, which had 26's eyes lighting up. However, I don't know if those skills will actually come in handy. Frankly, you'd be a little wasted on this trip, 26. Oh, was the girl's reply. Then that confidence returned. No. I want to come because. I want to come. I mean, I want to be with you. It's alright to follow just because, right? I suppose, Aurora said. Evelyn is coming in here. Evelyn is following along with me in the role of no-offense powerhouse. To scare off any problems we might encounter along the way. I did hire one more person, but she's a consultant and guide. We're otherwise traveling light. Oh. Does that mean you don't want me to come to travel with you? 26 asked. I wouldn't mind having 26's company, Ivil said. Nor do we necessarily need her to be useful to be good company. But I think it would be nice if we all came together. Aurora and 26 gave her a look, as if wondering if she was in on the joke. Ivil, however, had the poker face of a god. Aurora shook her head. Fine. We can go together. One more person with us couldn't hurt. Actually, there might be yet another person with us. Missy mentioned that you'd met her? She's a local bounty hunter, good reputation, fantastic credentials. Honestly, I would be stretching my budget to afford her services, but Missy managed to negotiate things down somehow. You mean Pixie? Ivil asked. Pixie? Aurora repeated. No, or perhaps? Her file says that her name is the Nightshade. She'll be escorting our transport out. As in, with her own ship? 26 asked. Yes. She has a fighter craft, Aurora said. That's awesome, 26 said. But isn't it also kind of excessive? Like, a whole fighter to guard a transport around the orbit of one moon? Aurora waved dismissively. Not just that. She'll be hovering around Callisto as well, taking shifts with the other hired help. Not every faction representative will have a cadre of bodyguards, but some will, and that includes light fighter escorts. If we were dealing with one of the major moons, then there would probably be one or two escort frigates keeping their diplomatic vessels safe. We're coming in a little underarmed, actually. Yes, Ivil said. They were definitely approaching the table with the appearance of being underarmed. I wouldn't mind seeing Pixie. That is, the Nightshade, again. She was fun. 26, I think you might like her. She has a very keen appreciation for spaceships, though mostly focused on fighter craft. I've never serviced a fighter before, 26 said. That must be so cool. And so expensive. They have a ton of bespoke parts. Most warships do, but it's worse for smaller craft since they need to cram so much more into a smaller space. Do you know what model her ship is? Wait, no, I'm rambling. It's fine, Aurora said. Your rambles are at least entertaining, which is why. Yes, you can come. Yes. 26 cheered. Wait. I need to get my things ready. Should I bring tools? Would that be weird? A little. I'll just bring the small set then. 26 said before running off. Ivil turned to Aurora. Thank you for that. 26 is a charming young woman, I'm certain we'll have fun together. And I think it would be good for her to see more of the world than engineering bays. Aurora agreed. I heard that you took her out on a date? Just to dinner, Ivil demurred. Aurora smiled. Still on your romantic quest, then? I'm not happily married yet, am I? Ivil asked. Aurora's smile turned a little more smug. You know, the station we're going to, Opera Sorax, certainly has a few entertainment venues. Those could be interesting to visit. I think I'd like that, Ivil replied with a smug smile of her own. What kind of entertainment are you into? Aurora hummed. I enjoy dancing, listening to music. I can play some as well, if you want, though I was never good enough at it to really stand out. You're a musician. Ivil delighted. That's incredible. What do you play? The Phobian harp, and? Yes, that's it. Ivil perked an eyebrow. And that's it? Aurora flushed slightly. Fine. It's mildly embarrassing, but I played the triangle for 3 years in school. The triangle? Well, I suppose that's something that requires skill? Aurora pursed her lips. I learned the harp to get away from that reputation. No one wants to be triangle girl. What about you? No triangles for me, I'm afraid, Ivil replied. She glanced down. Somehow, while moving things around, she and Aurora had ended up being rather close. So, Aurora, when it comes to instruments, do you like being the one playing the instrument, or do you like it otherwise? Aurora looked up slightly to meet Ivil's eyes and then seemed to realize how close they were. She licked her lips, and Ivil could sense her heart skipping and beating a little faster. You're being very flirtatious, Missville, she said before reaching up to adjust her glasses. I think you're worth being flirtatious with, Ivil said. But if I'm making you uncomfortable. She pulled back a little, then stopped when Aurora made an aborted gesture to grab her. No, I don't mind. Though, perhaps this would be unprofessional. Hardly. Unprofessional would be flirting in secret, or pushing when someone thinks it has gone too far. I'm not your subordinate, Aurora. Nor are you mine. I see, yes. Aurora swallowed and seemed a little flustered. She swallowed, then shook her head. Her hand rose and very lightly touched Ivil on the stomach. You're right, she said. I sense so, but, Ivil said. I'm more of a however woman, Aurora said. However. Excuse me, but you have me a little worked up and I'm having a hard time keeping my thoughts straight. Is that a compliment? A little, she admitted. You are very attractive, however, I am here to save my world. I can't afford attractive distractions at this time. As much as I would love it if you did. Things to me, it wouldn't be right. People are depending on me, Evelyn. And if we do something, I'd want it to be honest, not a fling. Ivil nodded. She could respect that. So put a pin on the flirting? A little, Aurora said. Only a little. Well, it is fun, Aurora replied. After the meeting tomorrow wouldn't be a bad time for this kind of thing. Oh. Wow. They both turned to see a blushing 26 by the entrance. Aurora still had a hand touching Ivil, but she pulled it back as if Ivil were a lit stove. I'm so sorry, were you two about to kiss and stuff? No, Ivil said. We were talking about it, however. Oh, wow, I should go add oil to the filters and check the blinker fluid, 26 said. No, wait, Aurora called out. It was enough to keep 26 from fleeing, at least. Stay for a moment. We should clear the air. Especially after that note you left me. Note? Ivil asked. I may have made a terrible mistake, 26 said. I'm so sorry, Miss Aurora. It's just that I don't know how to flirt is all. Ivil glanced between the two and discovered that she was mildly confused. She wasn't sure she liked it. Chapter 59, Notes Under the Door. Communication through text was still the cheapest, most effective way to communicate over long distances. Relatively easy to encrypt, low package size, wide bandwidth for long-distance communications, and very easy to transmit at near light speed. So, the art of texting never really disappeared. But just because an art form never faded did not mean that the average practitioner was good. Ivil held the note reverently pinched between forefinger and thumb. It was written in a chicken scratch scrawl, as if the writer was in a great rush to put everything down on paper. Ivil was actually somewhat impressed that it was written on paper at all, but the scratchiness of said paper suggested that it might have been freshly printed, perhaps in exactly the kind of matter printing machine that the SFO had in its engineering bay. Dear Aurora, I think you're very cute. Please go on a date with me. -26? Ivil reread the note for the 7th time, then carefully looked up. 26 was standing in the end of the room. No, standing implied. Well, it implied something more dignified. 26 was squirming at the end of the room, as if her pants were filled with biting ants. This is. Ivil started before hesitating for a moment. Incredibly endearing. Aurora, if I had received this letter I would be contemplating marriage. 26 choked on nothing. Ivil instantly checked her airways for obstructions and Aurora tittered prettily into her hand. It is rather endearing, isn't it? Aurora said. 26 slipped it in under my door, which I thought was supposed to be airtight. It is, 26 said. But the rubber seals on the bottom are meant to move a little to accommodate the doors sliding, so if you just push something against them with like a screwdriver, you can create a gap. And I'm talking too much, aren't I? No, it's fine, Aurora said. She sat, hands on her lap and lips turned up in the corners in a faint smile. It is genuinely very endearing. I have received a lot of propositions over the years. Offers for dates and even marriage. This is by far the sweetest. I sense a but, 26 said. Aurora blinked, glanced at Ivil from the corner of her eye, then returned her focus on 26. No buts. I'd love to go on a date with you, she said. Huh? 26 said, then she gasped. Really? Evelyn, did you tell her? Tell me what? Aurora asked. I did not, Ivil replied. Aurora looked between the two of them and seemed unimpressed. Can I be informed about whatever this is that's going on between the two of you? No? 26 tried. It was a little late to backtrack, in Ivil's opinion. 26 here had an interesting analogy about ships to tell me just the other day. Something about how each of us is a different sort of ship, with a different appearance and different capabilities. Don't start with that. 26 squeaked. I believe she compared me to a Martian super dreadnought and yourself to a sleek diplomatic vessel, Ivil continued. Aurora blinked slowly. I'll admit that I'm not sure I fully understand the analogy, though I'll take that as a compliment. Some diplomatic vessels are quite beautiful. Oh, the analogy was more about how 26 would rather see us all as a fleet rather than just two ships floating along in the void of space. Is that right? 26 very much looked like she wanted to die. I just want us all to get along? I believe you also wanted to service the ships and get to know them so well you could identify them in your sleep. Or am I misremembering? I see now, Aurora said. So 26 isn't a polyamory, then? It's not that. 26 said. I'm the tugboat and that analogy is all. I just want to. Wait, no, can we ditch the analogy completely? No, Ivil said. It was too cute to ditch. We're late. 26 said suddenly. I've packed up all of my things, so I'm ready to go, but if we don't start moving soon, we're going to be late. Aurora glanced at her wrist. She's right. We have 3 hours to get to a terminal on another part of the station. 3 hours seems like a relatively long time, Ivil said. Driftwood Station wasn't all that large, was it? She had crossed a decent amount of it with 26 and Missy already, and it never took more than an hour to cross it. For all of its unusual shape, the station had decent public transportation avenues. I want to be there early, Aurora said. Ah, Ivil replied. Aurora was that kind of woman. She saw tardiness as a great sin. She wasn't keen on arriving somewhere several hours in advance only to be made to wait. Waiting was something lesser people did. I suppose there's no harm in heading out early. Let me fetch my things. Did you really pack everything you needed, 26? I did, 26 said with a nod. Ivil smiled as she walked past the young woman on the way to the ladder at the back of the ship. Then I'll see you in a moment, my little tugboat. 26 made a high-pitched keening noise as Ivil started up to the upper floor of the SFO. Ivil didn't have much to pack. A few changes of clothes, some essentials, and then items that completed her disguise. She had no use for hygiene items. She hadn't brushed her teeth in several years or needed soaps or pads or anything of the sort, but it might look suspicious if she didn't have that sort of thing in her bags anyway. She made sure to leave some things behind. It wouldn't do for anyone remaining to think that she hadn't marked her space. And then she was done and exiting the room with her things. 26 and Aurora were cycling through the airlock already, so Ivil had to wait a little before joining them. When she did, she discovered 26 standing at what felt like an awkward distance from Aurora, her cheeks matching the tone of her hair. Is everyone ready? Ivil asked. 26 had a ratty old backpack slung on. It jangled with every motion, and Ivil had a sinking suspicion that 26 had more tools than spare clothes on her. Aurora, in the meantime, had 3 bags. More than she'd started the trip on the hell together with. I'm ready to go, Aurora said. 26? Oh, yup. Fantastic, let's head out, then. Aurora, I imagine you've charted the route over already? Of course I have, Aurora said. It would be irresponsible of me not to. We're taking a tram 1 deck above to the station with the terminal, crossing it on foot, then waiting until 1800 local time. Follow me, if you would. Ivil scooped up the heaviest of Aurora's bags the moment she realized that Aurora wasn't sure how to handle all of them on her own. She appreciated the way Aurora's eyes widened when she lifted the entire bag with ease. The bag weighed as much as Aurora, and she enjoyed the implication that she could handle Aurora with just as much ease. As they walked, Ivil considered the 2 women she was with, and the very different ways they needed to be handled. Aurora was smart, poised, and very dignified. She came from a background where things were done just so, and she seemed to enjoy that kind of attitude without being unable to adapt to reality. Ivil was quite certain that if she wanted to seduce Aurora, all she would need to do was pin the woman to a bulkhead and have her way with her. But that was merely sexual in nature. To seduce Aurora's mind and heart would require a more delicate touch than merely ravishing her until she saw stars. It would require that Ivil prove that she was a capable consort, somewhat politically savvy, intelligent, and maybe opinionated and capable of defending those opinions in more ways than with mere violence. 26. Ivil's little tugboat was a whole other woman. She was incredibly brave, even if that bravery sometimes came out as fumbling. Ivil was afraid that if she pinned her to a bulkhead, 26 would hate every moment of it. A much softer, slower, delicate touch would be required there. Ivil was actually tempted to just let 26 do most of the work in approaching her there, because that would mean that 26 was moving at her own pace, growing as a person even as she grew closer to Ivil. She was also impossibly cute, and Ivil was entirely uncertain that she'd be able to resist the temptation to just gobble her up. She'd manage, as painful as it would be. Ivil snapped back to paying attention to more than just the idle chit-chat they'd been having as they moved when they finally arrived at the terminal. There was a woman waiting for them there, dressed in a suit and tight pants, hands folded demurely before her. The demureness didn't suit the large handgun strapped to her hip, or the sense that she had several stealth cores on her. "Ah, there you are," Aurora said as she greeted the woman. 26, Evelyn, this is Peppermint, our guide for the next few days. Chapter 60, It's Art. Spycraft was an art. At the moment, Ivil was staring at the artistic equivalent of a macaroni painting done by a particularly unskilled child. "Hello, Peppermint," Ivil said. She smiled and extended a hand to shake. The young woman smiled guilelessly and shook. Which was when Ivil spread her awareness into Peppermint's body. Not so strongly that the woman would feel it as anything but an impression of Ivil being somewhat intimidating, but enough for Ivil to suss out all of Pepper's potential, and also all of the cores she had within herself. It was a decent number. 6 active cores wasn't anything to sneeze at, and these seemed to all be working in concert, reinforcing each other in one way or another, or they were at least related. 1 core to mask core signature is probably her most valuable. 2 cores interwoven with Pepper's nervous system, one to allow her greater control over bodily functions and micro-movements, the other. Ivil frowned as she read the core, but no, she wasn't incorrect. It was specifically designed to make someone sickly. It would be temporary once activated, and likely not have any real side effects. Interesting, that. It didn't seem like a completely natural core. A split of a hybrid. None of Peppermint's cores were originals. They all had the mark of being splits of splits. The other 3 were simple ones. 1 in her brain to assist with neural interfaces, 1 core spread through her spine, and a last lodged deep in her brain. These 3 were control cores, usually somewhat useless, but in this case they enabled Pepper better control of her sickness-inducing core. This wasn't the work of coincidence. Most people who went around picking up cores through fights and wars did so somewhat haphazardly. One didn't often have a choice for which core they'd have access to. These worked together too well for that level of chaos and randomness. So they were a tailored choice. Peppermint comes with a decent referral and a good amount of experience, Aurora said with a kind smile. You have worked as a guide before, for this kind of event? Yes. Pepper said as she jumped. Was the woman startled? She tore her eyes away from Ivil and her expression was schooled into professional detachment. I've worked for several companies around Jupiter. I know the system and its moons well. I've made an extensive study of the culture of the many moons in this area as well. You can study that? 26 asked. It's anthropology, Peppermint said. A subject I was always fond of. But you're not Jovian, Ivil Antagonist pointed out. The young woman blinked. You're right, yes. I'm not Jovian. It was hard to guess at a person's origins. Well, it was sometimes hard to guess at a person's origins. Not to say that there was some cultural homogeneity across the stars, but it was frequently difficult to point to someone and guess at their origins with any accuracy. The exceptions were usually glaring, like the space clowns of Hamia, or people born in the poorer colonies who couldn't afford the medical care to ensure that their children weren't deformed by a complete lack of gravity. Peppermint was Martian, however, and Ivil knew this because there was every sign that the woman was a Mint operative. It was so unsubtle that it was almost comical, which in a way was its own sort of genius. Ivil couldn't berate Mint for putting this operative here. Well, she could, but it was so obvious that it wasn't possible to consider this any form of treachery. "Oh, you're Martian too?" 26 asked. "How did you know, Evelyn?" "Wait. Don't tell me. Is it because of the posture?" "The posture?" Ivil asked. 26 nodded, then stood taller. She was a bit of a natural slumper, and Ivil was surprised to realize that 26 was almost as tall as she was. If she put any effort into standing properly, 26's gangliness might actually turn into some imposing height. Well, maybe just height. 26 was as imposing as an excited puppy. "All of you Martians stand like this," 26 said. "You mean, properly?" Aurora asked. "I guess. You're one of them, so you'd know. I'll have you know that I'm Phobosian, not Martian," Aurora said. "Oh, sorry." 26 cringed back a little, and Ivil couldn't resist reaching out to pat around the head. "You'll have to tell me more about Phobos. I know basically nothing about the place. You don't exactly make a lot of ships, you know?" "We do make some," Aurora defended. "Mostly pleasure barges and yachts, but they are quite stunning to look at. In any case, Miss Mint, I was hoping you could guide us?" Pepper bowed slightly. "Please, Miss Sterlingworth, call me Pepper. And yes, it would be my pleasure to guide you today." They had come out to meet Pepper in the public plaza right next to a shuttle terminal. It wasn't so different to a spaceport, though the security here was far more relaxed. After all, the people taking a shuttle from here were, at best, heading to another station in Callisto's orbit. There were a few likely en route to rendezvous with some nearby spaceships, but that wasn't the problem of the Driftwood Port Authority. Caring about immigration was only important on the receiving end for a place like Driftwood. People leaving? The station couldn't care any less. So outgoing security was nothing to be concerned about. "Our shuttle is waiting for us in docking bay 4C, Pepper said. "You'll note that it's not the same shuttle that you originally chartered. I took the liberty of booking another craft on its way to a different station with a layover at the station you were aiming to reach." "Smart," Aurora said. "You trust this change?" Ivil asked. "It's not so unusual as far as security measures go. In fact, it's how I ended up on a hell together in the first place. As long as Miss Mint was discreet about the change." "I was, ma'am," Pepper said. "I understand that it's difficult to trust me so soon in our relationship, but please have confidence in me. It won't go amiss." "Very well," Aurora said. "The ship we were meant to board is in Bay 4F, right?" "Indeed. Unless anyone targeting you has observers very close by, we should be safe during transit. But the ship will be departing in Pepper glanced at a watch on her wrist. 28 minutes. "That's barely any time at all," 26 said. "The fourth bay is just there," Aurora said as she gestured to a passenger loading bay. There were indeed large numbers printed over the doors. "Yeah, but I wanted to check the ship out first, just in case. These little shuttles always have the worst maintenance. Even the cheapest spacefaring ship had better upkeep." They slipped into the bay, then had to wait their turn in a relatively short line where a bored young man looked over their electronic tickets before letting them through. There was an automated baggage check as well, but it all went by relatively quickly. Then they headed towards their ship. Being a more civilian dock, there were several large windows overlooking the actual docking locations where the shuttles were being ferried in. "Oh, that's a converted Super Econ," 26 said as she pointed to their shuttle. It was a long, tubular kind of ship, with a stubby control room at the bottom front and the loading airlock right above that. The ship was covered in several maneuvering thrusters. The rear bulged out a little around a large engine, and a second, less impressively large thruster, sat at the very front for slowing the ship down. A ship's airlock opened, a service drone pushed a cart with all of their baggage in, and then the passengers were finally allowed into the ship. Ivil was not impressed. The center of the ship was a long corridor with small booths on the sides. Within these were the cheapest acceleration chairs imaginable, all designed to unfold into incredibly uncomfortable seating spots for the remainder of their trip. There was an automated drinks and food service, as well as washrooms so small that Ivil doubted her ability to fit into any one of them. "Wow, this is incredible," 26 said. "It's passable," Aurora replied. "That you think it's incredible is incredible." "Really? Why? I've never been a passenger on the shuttle like this before. Back around Saturn, if you wanted to get from one station to another, you hitched a ride on a service ship. There were even some people that would grab on with their Ava suits and hope that the Excel wouldn't knock them loose. Every time I talk to you I feel like we had very different upbringings," Aurora said. 26 smiled. "Yeah, of course. Like I said, you're like a pretty yacht, all beautiful and sleek and pretty. I'm just an old beaten-up tug. Does that analogy imply that you still want to shove her around and put her in her place?" Ivil asked. At least she'd have 26's stuttering denials for entertainment, so things weren't looking too boring.